A billionaire tech mogul, widowed and raising a son alone in the Hamptons, handpicks 6 elite women, models, CEOs, socialites, to become his new wife and, more importantly, a mother to his 8-year-old boy. But what no one saw coming was this. The boy chose someone else entirely. Not the polished contenders, but the woman who cleaned their floors. Why would a child reject everything his father thought was perfect? What did he see that everyone else missed? Stick around to find out how a single decision flipped a billionaire's world upside down. Like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more true-life twists. Richard Harrington had everything. Money, power, and a sprawling estate nestled deep in the Hamptons. From the outside, his life looked like something out of a feature in Architectural Digest. But there was one thing he couldn't buy. No matter how much he spent, peace inside that house. It had been 2 years since his wife, Emily, died in a sudden boating accident. And since then, his son Ethan had barely smiled. Therapists came and went. So did nannies, tutors, child development consultants. None of them stayed long. None of them could reach Ethan. He'd become quieter, withdrawn, spending most of his time building elaborate Lego cities in his room or staring silently out the window. One chilly Saturday morning, Richard stood in his glass-walled office overlooking the empty tennis court, tapping a Mont Blanc pen against his palm. Amanda, his executive assistant, stepped inside holding a slim leather folder. "They've all confirmed," she said. 6 profiles, all fully vetted. Columbia grads, Fortune 500 resumes, clean backgrounds. "You want it impressive, this is it." Richard nodded without turning. "And Ethan? He's in the art room," Amanda replied. "With Rachel." Rachel. The name lingered in the air for a second too long. Richard finally turned around. "I want him to be part of this process. He has to feel included." Amanda hesitated. "Sir, he's 8. That's exactly why. The decision isn't just about me anymore." Rachel Bennett had started working at the estate a year ago. Hired as a housekeeper, she was quiet, efficient, never got in the way. What Richard hadn't realized until recently was that she'd become Ethan's shadow. She taught him how to make paper planes. She let him paint on the back of delivery boxes. She even stayed in his room through thunderstorms, humming lullabies when no one else could calm him down. Richard didn't know any of that. Not yet. He only knew one thing that morning. He was done outsourcing love. So he hired the best matchmaking firm in Manhattan, wrote a blank check, and asked for 6 women who could handle his world and maybe help his son heal. What he didn't expect was that the healing had already begun, and it wasn't wearing Prada. It was wearing faded jeans, sneakers, and a navy polo embroidered with the estate's logo. Rachel Bennett wasn't supposed to be noticed. She moved through the Harrington estate like a whisper, soft, efficient, and invisible, as any good housekeeper was expected to be. But to Ethan, she was the one constant in a house filled with strangers. That morning, while Richard was meeting with Amanda, Ethan sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor of the sunroom, surrounded by a mess of construction paper, empty glue sticks, and half-finished airplanes. The autumn sun slanted through the glass ceiling, making his brown hair glow like amber. Rachel knelt beside him, picking up a crumpled wing. "You're getting better at this," she said, smoothing it out. This one actually flew more than 10 feet. Ethan cracked a half-smile, the first sign of life in a face that had known too much silence lately. "Can we make the jet again? The one with the folded nose." Rachel paused. "Only if you help me clean up afterward." "I always do," he said matter-of-factly. She laughed softly, tying her curls back into a loose bun. "That's true. You're more helpful than most grown-ups around here." As she reached for a fresh sheet of paper, Ethan grew quiet. His fingers fidgeted with the corners of his sleeves. Then, without looking up, he whispered, "If I got to pick a mom, could I pick you?" The question froze the room. Rachel blinked. Her hand paused mid-fold. She looked at him, but Ethan was staring down at the paper like it held the answer. "I know you're not fancy," he added quickly, "like the ladies on Dad's list, but you don't make me nervous." Rachel exhaled, slowly. She rested the paper down and brushed the glue from her fingers. "Sweetheart," she began, but the words caught in her throat. She looked away, forcing a smile she didn't quite feel. People like me don't get picked for things like that. Ethan looked confused. Why not? She didn't answer. Instead, she reached over and gently tapped his folded airplane. Show me again how you made the nose fold sharp like that. Ethan nodded, accepting the unspoken switch in subject. But something lingered in the air, something Rachel couldn't shake, where neither of them needed to say anything to feel understood. Later that afternoon, while polishing the brass railings along the grand staircase, Rachel overheard Amanda briefing the kitchen staff. The tone was hushed but urgent. Everything has to be perfect. The guests will be arriving tomorrow at noon. Make sure the floral arrangements are refreshed every 2 hours. Mr. Harrington is expecting elegance. Rachel kept her eyes down, polishing carefully. She knew her role. Floors, dishes, silence. She didn't belong upstairs. And yet, when she caught Ethan watching her from the top landing, holding one of their paper jets in his hand, she couldn't help but wonder, what if she did? What if just this once, someone didn't care about who she wasn't, but who she already was? The next morning arrived with a quiet tension humming through the Harrington estate. Every hallway had been vacuumed twice. Every marble surface wiped to a shine. The kitchen smelled of lemon polish and sourdough rolls Rachel had baked before sunrise. But no one noticed that. All eyes were upstairs. At precisely 11:58 a.m., 6 women stepped out of a pair of sleek black town cars, heels clicking against the circular driveway like a clock counting down to something irreversible. They didn't come empty-handed. Each carried a designer tote or a meticulously chosen gift bag. One brought hand-painted storybooks from Paris, another a custom-made puzzle carved from Vermont maple. They weren't just visiting, they were auditioning. Amanda, ever the professional, greeted them at the door with polite smiles and firm nods. Mr. Harrington will be joining you shortly. In the meantime, please make yourselves comfortable in the conservatory. The conservatory looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a white baby grand piano, and fresh peonies arranged with surgical precision. But even with all its elegance, it felt cold, too perfect, too prepared. A woman in a navy power suit, Victoria Grant, leaned over to the actress beside her. He owns 3 biotech firms, right? 4, the actress replied, adjusting her Hermes scarf. And a robotics company. I Googled him last night. Smart. Victoria smirked. I don't plan to leave here empty-handed. Across the room, a younger woman, Isabel Montgomery, tech investor and former Stanford valedictorian, stood near the windows. Her expression composed but calculated. She watched the others like a chess master assessing her next 5 moves. Each woman had a different edge. Elise, the Southern belle with charm and an MBA. Tara, the polished TV anchor whose smile never dropped, even when no one was looking. And Zoe, 29, daughter of a senator, exuding calm like a well-oiled PR machine. They weren't just beautiful. They were brilliant, articulate, and carefully crafted for a life in the public eye. But none of them noticed the small pair of eyes watching from behind the curtain in the hallway. Ethan stood just out of sight, clutching a wrinkled corner of his hoodie, expression unreadable. He didn't see mothers. He saw performances. The introductions began with a kind of ceremony. Amanda led each woman, one by one, into the sitting room where Richard waited near the fireplace. Glad it was worth the read. Each meeting lasted exactly 15 minutes. Amanda kept time like a conductor, ensuring no one overstayed or underwhelmed. Isabel spoke about her passion for STEM education and how she wanted to start a nonprofit for gifted girls in underserved areas. Zoe detailed her experience as a diplomat's daughter, her multilingual skills, her ability to host gala dinners on 3 continents without blinking. Tara explained how her on-air experience made her adaptable, calm under pressure, and deeply attuned to the importance of public image, especially for someone like Richard, whose name alone could swing markets. Each woman smiled at the right times, asked about Ethan, nodded when Richard mentioned he worked late hours. None of them asked how Ethan was doing. Just as the last conversation ended, Amanda leaned into the room and gave a subtle nod. Ethan's ready. Richard rose and walked toward the side corridor where his son was waiting. The boy stood stiffly, hands in his pockets, wearing a blue button-up shirt and dress shoes he clearly hated. His hair was combed reluctantly. "You okay?" Richard asked. Ethan shrugged. "They're just people, buddy. Say hello, be polite." Ethan looked up. "Do I have to pick one?" Richard hesitated. "Let's just meet them first, all right?" As they walked into the conservatory, 6 pairs of eyes turned toward the boy like cameras finding their mark. The mood shifted instantly. Voices softened. Ethan took it without a word, turning it over in his hand. It gleamed, cold and unfamiliar. Zoe crouched next. "I used to love puzzles when I was your age. Want to do one together sometime?" But his eyes kept drifting toward the hallway, waiting. Just as the room settled into an uncomfortable rhythm of polite questions and measured smiles, the conservatory doors creaked open with a gentle push. A soft clink of glass followed. "Excuse me," Rachel said, her voice low, almost hesitant. "I thought the guests might like some lemonade and shortbread." She wore her usual uniform, dark jeans, a navy polo with the Harrington crest, and her hair tied back in a loose braid. No makeup, no jewelry, just a tray of hand-poured drinks and a plate of warm cookies dusted with sugar. Every woman in the room turned. Zoe's eyes flicked over the tray, then back to Rachel. Tara smiled, tight and polished, as if caught off guard by an extra in her scene. But Ethan, his face transformed. The stiffness disappeared. His shoulders relaxed. He stood straighter, took a step forward. Reaching for a cookie. "You made the ones with cinnamon again?" "Just like you asked," she smiled. The boy looked back at the women, proudly holding up the cookie. "Rachel makes the best ones. Even better than Mom used to." A pause. Long, heavy. Rachel froze, one hand still on the tray. The room held its breath. Richard's brow tightened. Isabel was the first to recover, stepping forward with her signature grace. "That smells amazing. Do you cater for the family often?" Rachel gave a polite nod. "I do what's needed." Victoria sipped her lemonade and turned to Richard. "Well, it's good to know the staff here is so involved." Ethan wasn't listening. He stayed close to Rachel, munching happily, cookie crumbs clinging to his shirt. He didn't look nervous anymore. Tara crouched beside him again. "What's your favorite game, Ethan? I've got a Switch at home. We could play together." But Ethan shook his head without looking at her. "Rachel and I build blanket forts in a library. You can't do that on a screen." Zoe let out a light laugh. "That's adorable." But her tone was strained. Too sweet. Too sharp at the edges. Rachel shifted slightly, lowering the tray to a side table. "I'll leave these here. Sorry for..." "Can you stay?" Ethan interrupted. Rachel blinked. "Stay." "Yeah," he said simply. "Everyone's pretending. But you're not." The air in the conservatory turned thick, like someone had shut the windows and locked the silence in. 6 women, once radiant and poised, now stood awkwardly with crossed arms or forced grins. Rachel looked down at Ethan, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sweetheart, I don't think. I want you to stay," Ethan said louder, looking up at his father now. "Can she, Dad?" Richard's jaw tightened. He hadn't planned for this. He glanced at the tray of lemonade, then at the 6 women, all trying not to stare too hard. "Ethan," he said carefully, "Rachel has work to do. But I want her here," Ethan insisted. "She knows me better than any of them." Zoe laughed softly, trying to lighten the mood. "Well, that's because she lives here, doesn't she?" Rachel offered a quick smile, stepping back. "It's okay. I'll head back to the kitchen." "No," Ethan cut in, his voice firmer than anyone expected. "This isn't fair. You told me I'd get to help choose, but no one asked if I already had a choice." Richard stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Ethan, let's not do this in front of everyone." "Why not?" Ethan looked up, eyes shining, not angry but sure. "You said I'd know who felt right." "I do. It's Rachel." A long pause. Victoria shifted, folding her arms. "With respect, Mr. Harrington, are we competing with the housekeeping staff now?" "Excuse me." Rachel's voice was calm, but her back straightened. "I didn't ask to be part of this." "No one said you did," Isabel muttered under her breath. Ethan's small hand reached for Rachel's. "You don't need to say yes. I already picked you." Richard looked at his son. then at the women around him, each one polished, vetted, qualified, and then at Rachel, whose face was flushed, her hands slightly trembling. "This is ridiculous," Elise finally said, her southern lilt cracking with disbelief. "We flew in for this." But Ethan didn't flinch. He looked at each of them in turn. "Do you know what song helps me sleep when it thunders? Do you know what color my dog's collar was before he died?" "Rachel does." The room went quiet. Ethan's hand stayed in Rachel's. No one said a word. Richard broke the silence first. He cleared his throat, trying to gather what little control he had left of the moment. "Ethan, you've known Rachel for a while. That's why you feel comfortable with her. But this is it's not about time." Ethan interrupted, his voice steady. "It's about how someone makes you feel." The boy turned to the 6 women, his expression earnest, not cruel, not dismissive, just honest in a way only an 8-year-old could be. "Can I ask you all something?" he said. Tara smiled, recovering her composure. "Of course you can, honey. Do any of you know how to make pancakes without eggs?" The women blinked. "Victoria Froneth, why would you want pancakes without?" "I'm allergic," Ethan said. "Rachel makes them with bananas instead. They're better than the regular kind." Zoe tried to laugh. "That's cute, but we could hire a chef, you know. Probably even better than Rachel." Ethan's expression didn't change. He took a breath. "Okay, next question. Do you know what story helps me sleep when I have nightmares?" "Sweetheart," Rachel whispered, tugging gently at his hand. Maybe that's enough. But he kept going. "Rachel tells me a story about a fox that lives in a city and builds a secret garden on the roof of a building no one sees. It's not from a book. She made it up. For me." There was silence again. No one moved. "I don't need someone to buy me things," Ethan said softly. "I need someone who sees me." Elise tried to recover. "Well, darling, I work with kids all the time. I volunteer in my churches." "I'm not a project," Ethan cut in. His words hit harder than any raised voice could. Richard looked at his son. He hadn't seen him speak with this kind of certainty in maybe ever. The boy stepped closer to Rachel, still holding her hand. "I know this isn't how things are supposed to go," he said, looking up at his father. "But it's the truth." And for once, no one in the room had anything rehearsed to say. Dinner that evening was unusually quiet. The dining room, with its chandelier dimmed and long oak tables set for 3, felt colder than usual, even with the fire flickering behind the glass. Richard sat at the head of the table, pushing roasted asparagus around his plate. Across from him, Ethan poked at his mashed potatoes. Rachel, still in her uniform, had declined to join them and instead served from the sideboard in silence. The silence stretched. Then Ethan put down his fork. "I'm not hungry," he said. Richard looked up. "You barely touched your plate. I'm not eating until you and Rachel talk." "Ethan, you're pretending nothing happened today," Ethan said, his voice calm but steady. "But it did, and I meant every word." Rachel stood frozen, still holding a pitcher of water. She glanced nervously between father and son. "Ethan, sweetheart." "No," he said, turning to her. "You're sad. You've been quiet all night. I can tell. And Dad's been looking at you like he's mad, but he's not really mad. He's just scared." Richard's jaw clenched. "Ethan, that's enough." "No, it's not," Ethan said louder now. "You're scared because you feel something and you don't know what to do with it. Just like I was when Mom died. But Rachel didn't run away from it. She stayed. And you're pushing her out like she doesn't matter." The boy's voice cracked slightly, but he didn't cry. He stared straight into his father's eyes, unmoving. Richard didn't answer. Instead, he looked at Rachel. For the first time, really looked at her. Her hair was slightly frizzy from the kitchen heat, her eyes tired. But there was a strength in the way she stood there, refusing to let emotion spill over. "I've been in boardrooms with people worth $10 billion, Richard finally said, quietly. "And I've never been more out of my depth than I am right now. You're the only thing that feels like home." Across the table, Richard exhaled, slow, long, and honest. Then, almost reluctantly, he whispered, "Maybe it's time I stopped running too." The next day passed in slow motion. Rachel spent most of it in the laundry room, folding towels that didn't need folding, ironing napkins already pressed, anything to keep her hands busy. Every time she passed Ethan's art room, she slowed down, listening for the sound of Legos clicking or soft humming from the speakers he liked. Nothing. Silence. Richard hadn't said anything since dinner. Not a word. Not a glance. By late afternoon, she convinced herself it was over. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She began packing her things in the staff quarters, quietly, without ceremony. One bag, just in case. Then came a knock. Not loud, not demanding, just a firm, deliberate knock on the laundry room door. She turned. Richard stood there, hands in the pockets of his gray overcoat, face unreadable. "Can we talk?" he asked. Rachel nodded, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Of course, but he didn't speak immediately. Instead, he looked around the room, the baskets of folded sheets, the scent of lavender detergent. "I didn't come here to ask about chores," he finally said. "I came to ask you to dinner." Rachel blinked. "Dinner?" "Yes," he said. "With me. Not a staff. Not for Ethan. Just dinner." She hesitated. "I don't think that's—" "Rachel," he said gently, "I've spent the last 2 years running from everything that reminded me of what I lost. Then you came along and reminded me what it feels like to have something to lose again." She didn't answer. Her breath caught somewhere between caution and hope. "I'm not asking for promises," he continued. "I'm just asking for one night. To sit across from you as equals. As people, not roles." Rachel swallowed hard. "Where would we go?" "I have a reservation. Somewhere quiet. Off the island. No photographers. Just food. And maybe laughter if we're lucky." Still, she paused. "What about Ethan?" "He's already made plans," Richard smiled. "Apparently, he invited Amanda to play chess." She didn't say no. Rachel laughed softly. A nervous kind of laugh. The kind you make when the world shifts under your feet. "I'll need an hour," she said. "You have 2, Richard replied. "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." The car ride was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Rachel sat in the passenger seat, hands folded tightly in her lap, while Richard kept his eyes on the winding road ahead. Outside, the trees blurred past in streaks of amber and gold, autumn brushing its colors across Long Island's coastline. They didn't speak much until they reached the small restaurant tucked beneath ivy-covered brick. It wasn't grand or ostentatious. No ballet, no flash, just warmth, soft jazz spilling from the windows, the clink of silverware, the smell of roasted garlic in the air. Over wine and roasted duck, conversation slowly came back to them. Not about money, not about grief, just memories, funny ones, ordinary ones. Richard told her about the time Ethan tried to build a telescope out of paper towel rolls. Rachel told him about how she once got locked in the estate's pantry for an hour and didn't tell anyone because she was too embarrassed. They laughed, real laughter, midway through dessert. Richard leaned back, watching her with a softness rarely seen on his face. "You know, I wasn't looking for someone to replace Emily. I thought if I found the perfect match, on paper, it would make sense again. But none of it made sense until Ethan looked at you the way he used to look at her." Rachel didn't speak. She couldn't, not with the weight of those words pressing against her chest. So Richard reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm not offering a fairy tale," he said. "I'm offering something real. Messy, complicated, but honest." Rachel finally looked up, her eyes bright. "I can live with that." Back at the estate, Ethan was waiting in the hallway, barefoot in pajamas, blanket draped over one shoulder. When he saw Rachel step through the door, his whole face lit up. "Did you go?" he asked. "I did," Rachel smiled. "And I had a good time. Did you say yes?" Rachel knelt down, pulled him into a hug. "I said maybe, and that's a start." Richard stood behind them, quietly watching. And for the first time in years, his house, so long filled with echoes, felt like a home again. Because sometimes, family isn't chosen by blood or by contracts. Sometimes, it's chosen by the child who sees what grown-ups forget. Back into Next Pointing Right, if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And tell us in the comments, what makes someone truly family to you?